You're listening to The Roots, a podcast from Minnesota AMA District 23 ARMCA. I'm your host, Jackie Reese. Let's dive deeper into what makes our district so great. This podcast was prepared by an independent contractor and may not be the views of the Board of Directors of District 23 ARMCA or any of their sponsors or affiliates. Welcome everybody to episode 21 of The Roots, our first episode of 2022, and tonight we are joined by Donny Bonnicksen, longtime District 23 ARMCA member. Donny, how's it going tonight?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So we had talked last summer about having a podcast. You've been probably one of our longest standing members of District 23 ARMCA. In the beginning, how did it all start for you?
Well, it all started riding mini bikes with Mark Robinson. He's been a longtime racer too. Grew up next to each other, and his dad bought a mini cycle action magazine for us to read. And before the summer was over, we were racing. That was in 1975.
So did you have your own bike at the time, or were you sharing a bike? How did that all end up for you?
I had my own bike. I got with the Star Tribune, and I delivered newspapers on Sunday morning before I went to the races.
Wow.
Occasionally I'd be running behind schedule, and Mark or another friend of mine that was a racer, Brian Carney, they'd have to help me finish my route so we could make it to the races before practice started.
That's awesome. So at that point, they were District 23 ARMCA races, right? So I guess, how did you find it? It wasn't like we had the internet back then, right? Like, how did you come across D23 itself?
Well, I guess just finding out where the races were being held. Mark Robinson's mom worked for a builder, and the builder's son was friends with Brian Carney, who was one of the top A riders back in the day. And he kind of introduced us to it all and just went crazy from there. Started racing every weekend by 1976.
So you talked a little bit about you supported your own racing with your paper route. How did that develop throughout your teens and into your 20s? How did you continue to support your racing career?
Well, it was pretty much paper route in the Star Tribune. I became the paper shack manager. So I had to count out all the other paper boy and paper girls' papers for them. On Sunday mornings, I'd have to put the want ads, the funnies, and the news sections, stuff them all together, put them in separate piles for everybody, the paper and morning weekday papers as well. That was my primary income all through high school. And I was able to buy a new bike every season, sell the old one used, save enough money from the paper out, and have enough to buy a new bike. And then I also will say that I could go racing all day on Sunday for $40. Wow. That would be my share of gas to get there. It was under $5 to get in the gate and $10 a class to sign up. I think I'd have enough left for a hot dog at the snack shack.
That's awesome. You mentioned getting a new bike every year. Over the years, what is your favorite bike from maybe each era? Of course, bikes have changed a lot since the 70s. How have they changed for you, and which ones are your favorites?
Well, it's hard to say. Whatever the best deal was my favorite. I would wheel and deal with dealers all over and get some kind of support. So I jumped from brand to brand. It started on Yamahas and Suzukis, Hondas, Kawasaki's, and then now I've been on Kawasaki for probably the last 20 years.
Wow.
They have a good support program, and there's lots of extra parts around, so we just stick with Kawasaki.
Wow, that's wild. 20 years. How has your Kawasaki changed over the past 20 years?
Well, the best change of all is the electric start button. They were green and they still are green. So they're a great bike. They're all good bikes. I don't know which one I would choose if price was no object, but the Kawasaki works good for me, and I get a lot of support on Kawasaki, so
Awesome.
it enables me to keep going.
Yeah, that's great. That's great that they've stuck with you for so long. Was there anyone that you really looked up to growing up racing? We mentioned a couple of people early on in your early part of racing, but is there anyone else throughout the years that's really had an impact on your racing career?
Yeah, lots of people. I threw out some names from the past. Arnie, like I brought up earlier, was a big part of my racing. Um, there's a guy named Gary Gingle that was probably the fastest guy in the state when I started back in 75, 76, and got to spend some time with him my first couple of years of racing, and there's a little story behind that. Um, I was at a party and Gary was there, and he was currently number one 125 rider in the state. And he told me how to go through the big whoop-de-doos. And he said, just hang back and hold it on wide open. And if you ever get in trouble, do not let off. So I saw him at the Pro Nationals probably 5 years ago at a little party by the DJ. And I told him that story. And he replied to me, I wish I never would have told you that. So he is a big influence. Ron Hepner was a top rider back in the day. I watched him a lot. Bonnicksen brothers, Steve, Jimmy, and Tommy Bonnicksen was probably the first factory rider from Minnesota. Did I bring up Donny Schmidt, Dave Schmidt?
Not yet.
Dave Schmidt was Donnie's older brother. Donnie was, we all know Donny Schmidt is a two-time world champion. I spent a lot of time with him in my younger days, learned a lot from him. He was younger than me, but I still looked up to him. Bruce Gates, he still rides occasionally. If you ever ask Bruce Gates what his technique is to go fast or how I could go faster, his answer is grab as much throttle as you can and turn it all the way. And it works for him. Sometimes it puts me on the ground, but
Yeah.
that was always good advice from Bruce. Good buddy of his, Pat McNamara, and the Kiken brothers, rode with them a lot. They have a track that's kind of famous. Guy named Bob Rathkamp was been with me for a long time. He was an O'Neill rep back in the mid 70s and went to Cinesilo and then Axo, and now he owns a boot company that sells Garnet boots. So I still talk to Bob monthly, and he's a really good guy. We all know Craig Decker from Enzo Racing, but his dad, Will, started way back in the day in the mid 70s. And he's kind of been a guy that's stuck with us. And he works in California at the Enzo suspension. And then Craig, his son, does the Enzo suspension in Texas. Timmy Brinlauer still racing. Tim Bartella. I don't know if you know Mad Jack Brenthal. He's kind of an old time guy that's never gone away, still racing with us. Bowden Soderbeck, he's the Yamaha rep that we all know. Jimmy Olsen, Jeff Olsen, the pipe doctor, Ray Schlegel. All these guys I've raced with for years. A lot of them are still out there, but the best part is seeing these guys week after week for the last 40 plus years.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. So of those people, who were your biggest rivals in competition?
Well, it's probably Timmy Bernlauer, just because I've known him so long and we've had so many epic battles on the track for so many years. There's a couple other fast guys out there that I raced recently, a top rival. If I make him, and if neither one of us make a mistake, we're rubbing elbows most of the race, along with Timmy. And I mean, those two guys are always out there, and they're always, running me down hard.
Has that been the case forever, or is that just as you guys have gotten older?
Just as I've gotten older, a lot of these guys that I've mentioned, for many years. Tim Bartella always be a handful, usually would beat me. Going back, even further back, there was Mark Robinson. He was always a competitor of mine, and like I said, one of my best friends. I wanted to bring up one story about Mark. His parents weren't too interested in going racing, and when Mark and I were probably 19 years old, we went to California and raced the Golden State Series, and we went for the whole winter.
Huh?
And we lived like gypsies, but we had a great time, and it's part of my past I'll never forget.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. What was your favorite part of that trip?
Oh boy, getting to race at Saddleback Park, which isn't there anymore, and it's a famous old track. Just living on the beach, meeting some famous pro riders that we always looked up to, and we were kind of starstruck when we actually got to meet them and find out they're just normal motocross guys.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty cool. It sounds like that was a very memorable time for you. Of all your years of racing, which one was the most fun and which was maybe the most challenging?
Wow, so many great years of racing. I had my pro license in the mid 80s, had a couple top 20 finishes at the Millville National. Not so good at other states, but always rode Millville well. In the last few years, just riding the senior classes, it's still so competitive. Everybody pushes really hard up top, and yeah, it's all I can do to stay in shape and stay healthy and stay on two wheels. And I tried not to ride over my head, but when the gate drops, I kind of forget about that, and away I go.
That's great. Yeah, I have lots of great memories myself racing over the years, and I'm sure that they will continue as well. Um, let's touch on most challenging. Were there any years that maybe there was an injury or a financial struggle, anything that made one year particularly challenging for you that you persevered and you made it through?
Probably the most challenging was an injury that I got in the fall of 17 at Millville. It was muddy, and I skipped practice, which I found out is not a good idea. I think you need to acclimate to the track early in the morning, even if you don't race for 2 hours. Front end stuck in between a couple of the big bumps in the sand wash, and I took a trip over the handlebars and landed in the Mayo Clinic for 2 weeks, with several broken ribs. So coming back from that injury wasn't easy. Luckily, it was in the fall, so I had all winter to recover. And I like to eat food when I'm hurt, so I gained a bunch of weight. In the spring, I was ready to go, and haven't looked back since.
That's
So
great.
that was the most challenging, a bad injury and putting on a bunch of weight and getting over the fear of falling again.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's as a vet rider, right? So that's not necessarily as a young kid. It's, something very relatable to a lot of people that might be listening. So that's great to hear that, you didn't just give up, that you continue to keep pushing and keep racing.
Another fun time that stands out in my head is the year I turned 50 in 2011. I went to Loretta Lynn, third place. I've always been pretty proud of that. And
Yeah.
um, now I'm 60 and not competitive at Loretta Lynn's anymore, but I'll never forget that race.
Yeah. So, what's changed over those 10 years? Do the 60 guys, are they still just as fast as the 50 class, or maybe something personally for you? What's changed between that 10-year gap that at Loretta Lynn's at the national level?
Well, a 50-year-old guy is still pretty young in my eyes. And there's a lot of fast 50-year-old guys. Um, jump up 10 years at 60 is a whole different story. Um, you don't want to fall down if you can help it. Getting up just isn't the same. So trying to find a safe level to ride at and still go fast is a trick. There, I told my friend Scott Stanley, I said, why do you think the guys go so slow in the 60 class? Why? And I said, because they don't want to get hurt. You can still go out there and ride pretty hard and not take chances. And I think that's the way most of the 60-year-olds ride. Maybe not to that yet, but yeah, in the 50-55 class, there's still a lot of strong riders.
Awesome. Um, Are there any other crazy stories from over the years? You talked about your killer road trip out to California. Do you have any other wild stories from back in the day racing motocross, maybe in Minnesota, but maybe beyond?
Well, another story I forgot to bring up is in 1977, I went on a road trip with Mark Robinson and Brian Carney. I was 16 years old, and my parents let me go on a road trip with another 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. We left Minnesota. This beater station wagon we took out there had 150,000 miles on it. We went to the Suzuki School of Motocross, and that was at Carlsbad Raceway. They supplied the bikes, the hotels, the food, and it was a week-long motocross camp, and it cost $300.
Oh.
But the craziest part is that my parents actually let me go at 16 years old. You know, there wasn't cell phones or pagers or too many ways to communicate. And they trusted us enough to let us go on a 2,000-mile each way road trip to go to this motocross school. And that was pretty cool. I don't know if I would trust my 16-year-olds to do that when they were 16.
Right.
But, yeah, I went to a lot of nationals, and those trips stand out. Winter Series in Florida. Lately, just the local races, going with my two boys that race. That's what we do on the weekends. We have a camping spot at Millville, and it's like family down there. All the racers are in a tight-knit family, and especially the people that we've known for years. There's new faces that come and go, but there's still a few guys out there that have never stopped.
Mhm. Yeah, that's awesome. I know that we've known each other a very long time since I was a little kid. So, like you said, there's people that come and go, but there's a core set of people that sticks around for a long time. Um, since you've been in District 23 ARMCA for decades at this point, what are some of the notable changes that have happened on a district level in your perspective over the years?
Well, first of all, it seems like it's a lot better managed. Um, all the track owners or people that run the track are pretty on top of it. The tracks are kept up very well. Back in the day, they didn't water tracks. There was a track in Austin that I remember. they put oil on motor oil, like used motor oil
Oh,
on the track to keep the dust down. But we would ride through the dust and no one seemed to know any better. So that's changed a lot. As far as the district goes, um, the points keepers, they had points keepers back in the day, they still do. Um, it's like I said, it's managed better. I know like Mike Quinn and Scott Cripps, they're always, really familiar with what's going on and work really hard. There's a lot of passionate people in District 23, and that's what makes it all work.
absolutely. So you touched on it a little bit, but um, racing brings this community of people together, and especially, family relationships, things like that. You'd mentioned to me that you actually met your wife at a motocross track. How did that happen? And like, was it wild? Were you like, oh, I met this girl at the motocross track? Was it like crazy at that point in time?
She was somebody else's girlfriend at that time. And the crazy part is that we both grew up in Edina, and we only lived 2 miles apart. She's a few years younger than me, but a guy I knew from Edina that raced dated her. And a while after they had broke it off, I woke up thinking about her one day and got a hold of her, and uh, we started dating, and that was 30 years ago.
Wow.
Um, I always tell my kids to find a girl that rides dirt bikes because it'll be a lot easier for you to race. And so, finding a girl at the races is a step in the right direction, I guess. We've had a great time. Both of our kids have raced since 4 years old, and we still go to the races as a family now.
Yeah,
So,
like many people. How is it
yeah.
um deciding to get your kids involved with motocross, right? Like for some people, you're like, oh, I know this is dangerous. I don't want my kids to do it. What was it like deciding to involve your kids in a sport that is dangerous but is so much fun?
Boy, I don't know if there ever was a decision. I mean, when my oldest son was 3 years old, I got him a PW50. He couldn't ride it, but I just let him sit on it and pretend that he could ride it. And the day after he rode a pedal bike, he was able to ride that bike without training wheels. And my younger son, Trevor, took him a little bit longer to catch on, but once he started riding, he wouldn't stop. So um, we built a house that had a track in the backyard when the kids were small, and it's just been our family passion. So I think my wife knew that we were going to have little racers from the get-go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, why should other people have their family involved in racing, motocross, or other disciplines of motorcycling?
Well, not only is it a great family sport, and everybody gets to spend time together on weekends, but I think just being able to operate a motorcycle at a young age teaches you a lot of defensive driving skills maybe when you're older, and just gives you a lot of common sense of the right way to operate anything from a pedal bike to a car. um, it just I just think it's good to learn the technique, and it carries through to a lot of things in life.
Mhm, for sure. What advice do you have for other District 23 ARMCA members who might look up to you because of your speed, because of your duration of riding? What advice do you have for other people?
Well, have fun with it for sure. If you're a dad and you have a young son racing, push the fun part. The speed will come. Um, I don't know, just never quit. Just go out there and try your hardest and give it your all. And that's how you'll get the best results.
Yeah, absolutely. What does the future 2022 and beyond look like for you, Donny Bonnicksen?
To not get hurt, um, just to have a good time racing. I try not to be so competitive so I can have a little more fun at it. It can be stressful, especially when you have competitors that are as fast as you are and that will chase you down to the last corner. So I'm just trying to have fun with it. Trying to support my boys and so they can have as much fun as I've had, and just be there because I love being there.
Awesome. How long do you think you're going to stick with it, riding yourself?
70 for sure.
You got to hit the 70 plus class.
Yeah.
Give Mike Quinn a run for his number of championships in the 70 plus class.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Do you have any concluding thoughts as we round out this podcast?
I'd like to thank a few people that have helped me over the years. Kawasaki's always been good to me and they've helped me. Fly Racing, Enzo Suspension, Pro Circuit, Vice Cycle, Garnet Boots and the Boot Company, InStyle Graphics, and Star Cycle Mankato. There's many more people and companies that have helped me over the years. I couldn't have done it without them. But yeah, it's been a good run, and I'm gonna stick with it as long as I can.
That's awesome. It's great to hear and great to have somebody sticking around in District 23 ARMCA for many decades of racing.
Well, thank you, and thank you for all the hard work you do.
Thank you. And thank you everybody else for joining us for our first episode of 2022. We will see you every other Monday throughout the year. Thanks for joining us. Catch us every other Monday wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on our YouTube page.